I'm John Bitson, the Menard Family Director of the Sheila and Robert Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth. And welcome to our Human Progress and Flourishing workshop. Today's workshop is part of an all-day artificial intelligence event. So if you're here online just for the workshop, please stay all day. We have a variety of really great speakers today. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and human flourishing. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and education. We're going to look at policy issues associated with artificial intelligence. And I was just talking to some students earlier, and they said that we're going to have class. They want to have class here from now on the rest of the semester. So this is a great venue. It's great to see everybody here this morning. I'm really excited about our first speaker today, who is also part of our Human Progress and Flourishing workshop. So we have Neil Chilson here today, who's going to talk about human flourishing and artificial intelligence. Neil Chilson is the head of AI policy at the Abundance Institute, where he works to restore optimism and a sense of adventure to U.S. cultural and policy discussions about technology. Neil is a lawyer, computer scientist, and author of the book, Getting Out of Control, Emergent Leadership in a Complex World. He is the first known human to file an AI-generated comments on behalf of AI bots in a federal regulatory proceeding. Neil was previously the Senior Research Fellow for Technology and Innovation at the philanthropic community Stand Together, where he guided efforts to understand and promote the legal and cultural paradigms that enable people to discover, innovate, and improve all of our lives. Neil served as a Chief Technologist at the Federal Trade Commission, where he focused on the economics of privacy and blockchain-related issues. He also was an attorney advisor to acting FTC Chairman Maureen Ohlhausen. In both roles, he advised Chairman Ohlhausen and worked with staff on nearly every major technology-related case, report, workshop, or other FTC proceeding. Neil joined the FTC from telecom firm Wilkinson Barker Knauer. Neil is frequently quoted by the press, and his work has appeared in numerous news outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the USA Today, and Newsweek. Neil has a JD from the George Washington Law School, MS in computer science from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and a BS in computer science from Harding University. So really excited about Neil being here today. If you get a chance, look at his FTC testimony that is written by an AI bot. I think it's really pretty interesting, pretty cool. And I asked him about his reaction to that, and he said some people thought it was funny and some people didn't like it so much. But anyway, I'm excited that Neil is here today. So let's everyone please welcome Neil Chilson. Thank you.
Well, thanks, John. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Fargo. Had a great dinner last night, and it's great to be here with John and Jeremy and all of you. So thank you so much. If I had an AI bot to do my PowerPoint, it would have noticed that I left the presenter name and date in the template there. So I did not. So I'm glad to be here talking to you about AI. But why are we talking about this? Why now? What is the background that we have right now? Right now, I think there's a lot of pessimism in the world. We have deep declining trust in institutions. The federal government, our trust in the federal government is the lowest it's been across U.S. history. We have young people concerned their life won't be better. In fact, this great publication that comes out twice a year here, actually, I noticed there's a graph in here on the rise of adolescent pessimism. So young people are concerned their life won't be better. We have climate change, pandemics. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty about the future. And so in that context, on the other hand, we have Casey Harrell. Casey Harrell, you can check out there's a great New York Times story about him, but I actually encourage you to find the video and watch. Casey Harrell suffers from ASL, which is a degenerative neurological disease that makes the communication between your brain and your muscles stop. And that causes all sorts of problems. But among the problems that it causes is that speech becomes garbled and then unintelligible. Casey was given a UC Davis brain-computer interface. They put it in, and it could sense the signals that his brain was trying to send to his mouth and his tongue and his lips. And it got trained over time very quickly, actually, just 30 hours or so. And Casey can now talk to his family in his original voice, which is computer generated, but it's his original voice, and he can communicate again. And if you watch that first video, it will make you cry, I promise. It is outstanding what this technology has the potential to do to deliver great things to us. So that part of my job is to talk about this contrast, right? Like, why are we pessimistic about the future when we have technology that has these big promises? And at the Abundance Institute, where I do that, we believe there's two things that it takes for us to create the types of widespread human flourishing that technology promises. It takes a cultural environment that embraces innovation rather than fears it, and it takes a policy environment where it can thrive and grow. We're trying to move people from a scarcity mindset, this mindset that the pie is limited, that we're going to have to chop it up, we're going to have to fight over it, to a growth mindset, an abundance mindset that says, like, hey, a lot of our problems become a lot easier if we're not fighting over the pie, but we're growing the pie. And we do that through improving policy, trying to build talent, supporting talent, people who want to get into this space and build products, but also like work in policy, and then talk about a narrative across culture and how we can improve things. So I'm going to talk the big picture. What is the connection between technology and flourishing? I think sometimes it depends on where you are, but like different perspectives. People either like inherently think tech is connected to flourishing, or they think it's a threat to flourishing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll give a quick primer on what is AI at the very highest level. I'll talk a little bit about what is AI policy in the abstract, because I know we have several panels later that are going to dive deeper into this. And I'll talk about how do we get to a place of human flourishing from this technology. So if you step out and take the long view of history, we live in truly amazing times. Remarkable. The last 200 years have been incredible for humans. Global poverty is down enormously in that time. We have global life expectancy up from an average of 30 around the 1800s, up towards moving towards 90 now. Food supply and calories has just continued. This is even only just from the 60s, but famines are entirely a political phenomenon now. They are not a food supply or an economic problem. And this is the chart. This is the most important chart in human history, according to one economist. Global GDP capita. What this says, I'll just translate a little bit. For almost all of human history, the average person has lived consuming the amount of resources that you could purchase today with $3. That's almost all of human history. That's where people lived. Now, the average across the entire world is $33. And in developed countries, it's well over $100 a day. That is a 2 orders of magnitude increase in the last 200 years. We're talking about thousands and thousands of years in abject poverty. And then what happened? Why did that ramp off? Why is that growth there? So to paraphrase Alfred North Whitehead, that's when we invented inventing. And I don't really mean this literally. Obviously, people were always looking at the things around them and trying to improve their lives, trying to solve problems. That's what humans do. But it sounds weird to say maybe in modern context, but innovator was actually a slam. It was a pejorative. When you said somebody innovated, that word meant they were a heretic. That's the origination of that word. And so there was something that happened to society that said, hey, individuals with freedom who want to improve their lives, we think that's a good thing, and that progress can be made. That idea that progress can be made widespread across human prosperity, that started 200 years ago, essentially. And so that cultural moment is what launched all of it. It's not that we're way smarter than the Egyptians. It's not that we're, harder working than the Romans. It's that we had a culture that said, hey, with individual freedom and liberty, we want people to be able to build and improve their lives and share that knowledge with each other. And so that culture made a big difference. So, given that big culture shift that happened, that graph has been going up, but we're still quite pessimistic. And I'll talk a little bit about like a big reason for that is sort of ingrained into human psychology in a little bit when we move into the policy space. But before we get there, let's just step back and talk a little bit about what AI is. And then we'll talk about AI policy and some of the challenges that we face in overcoming this when we see these new interesting technologies, overcoming this initial reflex to pause or to be afraid or to be concerned about the future. So artificial intelligence is a really old idea. The idea that we can make machines think like humans is, there are Greek myths that have this idea in them. And the term itself was formulated in the 1950s. And Jeremy did a really good job referencing the fact that that definition has changed over time. When I was a kid, just getting interested in computers, cutting edge computer science was chess playing. IBM had Deep Blue, and there was big news when it beat the world grandmaster. But that was the cutting edge of AI research. And then, speech recognition was a cutting edge part of AI research. And, object recognition was a cutting edge part of AI research. Image search, the ability to filter or search a ton of content on the web. All of that was cutting edge AI research. It would have been called AI research at one point. And then it just became what computers do. In fact, I know a lot of you, the students, you weren't here, I think, when we were asked whether or not you've used AI and people raised their hands. If you've used one of these, you've absolutely used something that was called AI. Not that long ago, probably a decade ago. So all of these phones have AI in them. And so you have used AI, even if you didn't raise your hand. That definition has changed. And the way I like to think of the definition of AI is essentially it's computing that works. It's cutting edge computing. In fact, the guy who coined the term, John McCarthy, says that as soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore. And that's been sort of the history of AI. But what people are mostly talking about now, and Jeremy gave a good preview of this, are these large language models, this deep learning systems that they do something quite different than what we thought of as AI in the past. AI in the past, when you write a chess playing program, the programmer does all the work, right? They put in all the rules that they think the computer should follow in order to figure out what the next right move in a chess game is. Machine learning does something very different. It takes, rather than the programmer putting in a program that gives all the instructions and then the user putting in data that then uses that data to play a chess game or whatever, we do something different. We train a model. So the programmer writes a program that lets the machine learn from a bunch of examples. And so that is somewhat different, even though the idea of that is quite old. Neural networks are back to the 1960s. Some very smart people said, hey, well, couldn't we make a simulation of like a human neuron in a computer? And it turns out you can, but with the computer power that they had in the 1960s, that was not useful. And so we had artificial intelligence, like I was talking about in the chess games. Then we had machine learning. All your spam filters, those are machine learning, where Google or somebody has taken a bunch of examples of spam and a bunch of examples of good email and taught the computer to just giving those examples to distinguish between those two types of emails. Deep learning is the latest trend and breakthrough, and it's a breakthrough again, not so much theoretically, but also in the capability of computers that we have. We just have more powerful computers, and we have a lot more data than we had in the 80s. And so you can do things using these algorithms that have been around for a little while that do much more powerful things. And so here's what I was talking about. Classical programming, you put in the rules and the data and you get answers out. In machine learning, at least in the first phase, what's called the training phase, you put in data. Let's say you put in a bunch of pictures from the internet and you tag the ones that have cats in them. And then you put in, so that the answers are the tags that say these ones have cats and the other ones don't. And the machine learns how to distinguish those, the cat ones, the cat labeled ones from the ones that aren't labeled cats. And it comes up with rules. And then those rules you can use later in what's called the inference phase then you will put in an image, and then the rule would say, well, from what I've learned from all these other samples, that one's not a cat. And so that's pretty different. But this is what a model looks like right here. When at the end of that training phase, now this is a very small model. Most of them are obviously, this one do much, but most of them are huge, and multidimensional. But essentially, they come down to a giant multidimensional spreadsheet of numbers that represent the connections between the different types of things that were put into the database. So that's what it looks like, but how do we use them? Well, I decided maybe an easy way to do it would just to be look at my my prompt histories from Claude and from ChatGPT. And so these are some things that I've used it for. So if you look at that intro to Rachel Appleton, that was an email that somebody asked me to draft that was going to introduce them given this context. And I just said, hey, write me an email about these people I met at dinner, and in the context of potentially asking them to participate in some program. So it did, and then I edited it. Large language models, this is what people are thinking about now when they think of AI. They think of these chatbots, where you interact with a piece of software using text, or maybe you'd use it to generate an image or a song or something like that. But generally, it's these generative AIs where you put in a prompt, you get something back, and maybe you can go back and forth with it. But to my point earlier, AI is much broader than that. There's a ton else that machine learning can do, and that it is doing right now. I already mentioned the example from earlier, the ALS patient who can speak now because this model was trained, like I was saying, it was trained on a bunch of signals from his brain connected to him thinking about trying to say a specific word, and they knew what word he was trying to say. And so the computer could learn, well, these signals are associated with that specific set of sounds. And the scientists don't know what those signals, which signal matches up to the sound, but the computer learned that from just a ton of data. So we have lots of other examples. Another one that's great is like, these live caption glasses that let deaf people see the words that people are saying, because this is voice recognition. You can kind of do it on your phone, but this form factor is pretty interesting. There's lots of applications in the medical space. We're getting the ability to now scan imagery from a CAT scan or something like that, and the AI can spot cancers much quicker and actually much further ahead than most human experts can, because they've seen many more examples of both what good and bad looks like than any one human has. There's Detroit saved $380 million. You guys might remember the Flint issue with lead pipes. They are using an AI algorithm to identify which houses are most likely to have lead pipes. And that is saving them $380 million. And it's something that the technology didn't even exist 2 years ago, I think, when the Flint stuff was happening. AlphaFold is a product from Google that in biology, we know the sequences of all the proteins that make up our cells. We know like what order the chemicals come in, but what makes each protein unique is the shape that sequence folds into when it's actually inside the cell. And that's what makes drugs work. That's what makes drugs not work. And so AlphaFold now can predict those structures. If you had given a PhD scientist, like 5 years ago, a PhD biologist, that sequence, they would write a dissertation just taking that sequence and turning it into what the shape was. Now AlphaFold can do that very quickly. And that's going to radically change how we do drug discovery and personalized medicine. On maybe more on the content side of things, there's been some really interesting research about people who have esoteric beliefs or conspiracy theories engaging with in a conversation with chatbots and seeing a different point of view and in a way that maybe they hadn't seen before. And so I think there's lots of these uses of deep learning that go way beyond sort of the chatbot structures that we're thinking about. And part of that is part of what makes AI policy so difficult, as we can get into next. But that's the complication, the breadth of AI is only one thing that makes AI policy difficult. The thing that makes AI policy in particular right now difficult is a constant human trend of the techno panic. This is a well-established phenomenon that has happened pretty much to every technology you can think of, including some very silly ones like teddy bears. Bicycles, you can find all of these articles about bicycles going to do things like destroy fertility in women and shape your head a different way if you ride them too fast, or rattle your bones apart. And so every technology kind of goes through these types of curves. AI in particular, I think is very subject to it, because both the ideas of technopanic dominates academic writing, and especially for AI, in news headlines and pop culture representations of AI are almost always negative. And so when we think of AI, and when you say that, and when you pull the average person, what they think of is Terminator or HAL, or some of the more recent things. I think the new Mission Impossible that's going to come out has a bad AI in it. And so we often think of AI in that context. And that makes it very difficult to engage with this technology productively in the policy sense. And so coming out of that, because the technology is so broad, intelligence is basically a basic technology. It's a fundamental technology like electricity. And that means it applies across every single industry that you can think of. And so the issues come up, every single issue that you might think of from an industry comes up. And so we have safety issues, like whether or not the AI is going to give you the right answers. We have bias about, is it going to tell you, the founding fathers were a different ethnicity than they were. This happened with the Gemini Google model. Misinformation. Are people going to use this to tell lies in really convincing ways? There's labor effects. Is this going to replace jobs? Privacy effects. There's all these copyright issues around authors whose content is going into these models, being used to train these models, and they're very concerned about that. And then there's national security and government use concerns. Obviously, the way we might use these technologies in the US might be quite different than, say, China uses them on their populations. And so those concerns are worth addressing. So the key challenge here is that, I'm just going to switch to the approach. I think the key challenge here is that AI is too general of a term. As I said, it basically just means like the most cutting edge version of computing. And so often when you ask somebody, like, what are they afraid of about AI? They talk about a specific harm, and that specific harm comes about from a specific application. And so one of the examples I hear often is that a biased AI might give the wrong types of, it might discriminate against people in, say, like a banking setting. And so when you drill down to that level, you can say, okay, well, we're talking about banking applications and we're talking about banking computing, basically. That's not really, you can't really solve that problem at this abstract level of saying, let's regulate AI, but you can look down and say, like, well, are there banking rules that say you can't discriminate against people? Does AI make that different? Does it make it worse in some way? Well, let's talk about how to fix the banking rules. And so I think the right approach to all of these problems is to get away from talking about AI in the abstract and drilling down into AI as it's applied in a sector. Are we talking about transportation? Are we talking about self-driving cars? Okay, is there a regulatory regime around that? Yes, there is. Okay, well, where are the holes? How can we fill those in? And I think Ryan's probably going to dig in quite a bit deeper into all of that. I do want to give you a little bit of context on sort of who is in this space and the stories that they're telling, because those stories are influencing how people perceive this technology and ultimately what the policy outcomes will be. And so there's a pretty vocal group of what I call AI doomers. They would call themselves probably AI safetyists. And they're very focused on existential risk from AI. This is sort of the Terminator idea that because if we continue to scale these models, they will become more and more powerful, and then they will get out of our control, and we won't be able to control them. And so they're very focused on that. And so their solutions look like things that would address that level of risk. So bans, pauses, global licensing of large models. we have AI ethicists, and AI ethicists tend to be, they grow out of a long tradition of essentially like skeptics about computing overall. It's a little unfair. It's a little more nuanced than that, but people who are concerned about how technology affects society. And so that tradition is very much that tech can be a threat and that we need to figure out how to regulate it. And the AI doomers and the AI ethicists, they kind of hate each other. The AI ethicists think the doomers are distracting from, things that are actually happening right now. And the AI doomers think that the ethicists are focusing on stuff that doesn't really matter in the big picture. You have also just issue advocates who have been in a space like housing or lending. They've long been working in that area. AI is a new technology in that area. And so their ideas from the past, they now sort of recondition as being about AI in this space. And then they push for regulation. And then you have industry, and industry is very mixed. Like, I think it was Friedman who said, like, nobody hates competition like a competitor. And so there is a vibe within some of industry to say, like, hey, let's figure out how to make sure that we keep a step ahead of everybody else. And some of that might be through regulation. But also industry has some people seeking that competitive moat, but it also has some people who are really genuinely, I think they're worried about the future. They want the technology to work well. And then you have people who are very, very interested in the technology. There's nerding out and they want to build this stuff and they want to get it out there. And so, in addition to the sort of issue-based focus of policy, I think the one thing that is not focused on enough across all of those groups is the use of AI by government, both its positives and negatives. There is a lot of efficiency that could be gained in paperwork processing that government has to do, and lots of other interactions that you might have with a government official that can be smoothed by some of these tools, perhaps. But also in the sort of law enforcement or national security context, there's concerns there as well. And so, in addition to focusing on the specific use cases, focusing on targeted enforcement, as I said, of specific privacy areas and oversight of government uses, I think a lot of the way that we're going to incorporate these technologies into society will be through learning. And that's why I want to jump right into what you guys can do right now. And this isn't the only thing you can do to help make sure that AI incorporation into society goes well, but it is the easiest thing to do. And that's it. You can use it. Ethan Mollick says that everybody should spend 10 hours at least trying to use one of these new models in your day-to-day work. He has a great Substack, and he has a great article in the New York Times that sort of like lays out these, but this is my kind of summary of it. Pick a tool, experiment with it with everyday tasks. Don't think of it as a search engine. Iterate with it. Think of it as a conversation. If it gets something wrong, or even if it doesn't get something wrong, you should push it to say, like, hey, can you make that better? Think of it as a conversation, not a single question answer. Expect that there will be mistakes. And one of the ways you can help mitigate those is by telling it to think step by step or breaks complex tasks down into small things. And try it on lots of different things, but especially try it on things that you already know about, to sort of build your faith in where it gets things right and where it gets things wrong. And then just stay on top of these technologies by reading more about them. I think this is worth everybody's time, honestly. And so for those of you who have never used one of these models, I think it will help ground the concerns that you might have about the future, and also build some of that excitement about how you might be able to use it in the future if we try them out. So in summary, market-tested tech expands human prosperity. AI is powerful. It has very general applications. It's hard to define, but it's also kind of easy to define if you just call it advanced computing. It's very hard to predict about where it's going to go and what the effects are because it is a general purpose technology. I didn't say this earlier, but electricity was another example of a general purpose technology that took 40 plus years for it really to get integrated into, say, even factories. Factories started out integrating it by replacing their steam-powered engine that ran all the pulleys with a big electric engine. And then they realize, oh, we can just make a bunch of electric engines and move them throughout the factory, and that'll be a lot more efficient. Anyways, hard to predict exactly how it's going to work. It's hard to regulate in the abstract, but we have lots of regulation that applies to AI in the concrete, and it's easy to use, and you should. So I would love to, I've been talking at you for a long time, but I would love to talk with you in the time that we have left about like, what are your questions? What are your interests in AI? What are your fears? And so let's open it up to some Q&A and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Very, very informative talk. My question is that, so I'm an assistant professor and I teach business, and I'm trying to incorporate artificial intelligence into my course. But I think that my main concern is the misuse of it in all contexts. And I'll give you an example of what happens in my class. So I have these discussion posts where students would have to think of an answer for a question and write it. And a lot of students, I noticed, the non-diligent students, to eloquently put it, use it in a non-diligent way, where they would just copy paste the question and put it into the thing, and they would copy paste the answer as is. And the answer is well thought out, but it has very little to do with the substance of the question. And my colleagues and I, sort of over time, we've realized I've learned to recognize AI use. And I actually put in a proposal for a course where I can teach students how to diligently use it. And my main concern is that if they do this in the class, it's okay, but then if they go out into the workplace and they use it in a non-diligent way, it'll make them look very bad, and it may cause them for termination, but also it'll reflect badly on NDSU. And so my question for you, sir, is that what would you recommend that individuals do to try to curb that behavior? Because it's human nature. You know, it's the path to least resistance, and it's supposed to be very useful, but it can be very, very detrimental for their development, especially at a young age where they're supposed to be, you know, engaging in critical thinking.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think I've heard that concern a lot, and I'm not a teacher engaged in this. And one of the things that I'll say about AI, and you already heard that in the policy frame, but I think a lot of this stuff has to be worked out by the people who are in the arena working on it. And so the idea that people need to learn how to use it better is absolutely right. I think there is a inquiry that has to happen also about like, what is the, and this is a challenge with education overall. Like, what is the purpose of asking that question? Why are people taking that shortcut? Like, why do they think that is a better solution? Is it just because they're trying to get the work done? To your point, in the real world, you're going to face a quality challenge, right? Like, if your answer is not good, it doesn't matter how you produced it, right? Like, and so these tools are tools that can help you think critically. In fact, you can have prompts, like these meta prompts that you will have that will be like, explain to me what would be the logical, how would I break this problem apart? And then you can have the LLM help you break a problem apart and then put it back together. But to your point, that takes training. I think a lot of the idea of this as a shortcut to thinking, it's not. These are not like I said, that's why it's important to think of this as a conversation, not a search for answers. The way especially LLMs work is that the way I like to think about it is it basically gives you the average of the internet, right? And so if you're asking it a question, it's going to give you an answer that's sort of the average of all the content on the internet about that particular issue. And average is not good. I mean, especially on certain topics, right? It might be fine in certain things. Write me a cover letter for, X, Y, and Z. It'll get the grammar right and all of that, but the content might be boring. It won't be interesting. And I think that's the challenge that your students are going to face in the future if they don't learn how to think critically. It's not, and I'm a little worried that there are students who are good enough at prompting it that you don't know they're using it, but you're only seeing the bad ones. But and so the challenge that they're going to face in the future is not that they get the right answer; it's that they get the boring answer. And the premium in the job market in the future is not going to be getting just the right answer. It's going to be doing the things that only humans can really do at this point, which is getting the exciting thing that is not the average of the internet, that is new, and that's where, and these tools can help you build towards that, but they're not going to do it for you. So I think that education part, the class, I think they should approve your class, and then you can help teach the students. I saw another hand here.
Hi, my name is Romaine Kildee. I'm just a citizen who's interested in AI. You were mentioning that 200 years ago we invented inventing. You were referring to the Industrial Revolution, weren't you? Okay, because that's something that was people were brought from the countryside into the cities to work in the plants. And then my second question is hacking. I've seen movies and TV shows where hackers are getting into these self-driving cars. Does that mean that the hackers are smarter than the AI that's operating the vehicle, that they're able to take it over?
So the hacking problem generally and the effect of AI on it is still, I think that was an early worry, right? Like these LLMs, especially when they're trained very well, can generate code, and they can also look at a bunch of code very quickly. And so the concern is that hackers will be able to do like a sort of what's called a 0-day flaw, which means that nobody else knows that there's a flaw, 0-day bug, and they'll be able to scan code very quickly and find those. Jeremy's kind of an expert in this stuff, so we should probably, I feel like he should talk about it a little bit more, but it appears now that that is very useful for defense as well. And so making your code stronger is also gotten quite a lot better if you deploy these tools. And so that's on the general effect. On the automobile thing in specific, those devices are hardened in lots of ways. There's always vulnerabilities. But cars have had computers in them for a long time, a really long time actually, and a lot of them have been connected for a long time. And so there is a path towards making that very difficult to hack a drivable car. There has been some research of people who, using very aggressive techniques in a controlled environment, are able to take over some features of some of these cars. But it's not the normal situation, and it's certainly not. Which one is it? It's one of the Fast and Furious, wasn't it? That where she takes over all the cars and drives them all over. I don't know. It's certainly not like in the movies that you can do a sort of mass attack that would take over a bunch of cars all at once. There's a lot of defenses in place to make that both intentional and just like the logistics of taking over a bunch of things all at once. There's not really centralized points of control the same way that you might worry about. So, yes.
2 parts. First of all, thank you for the information. Should be a great basis for today's discussion. First, a question and then a request. A question regarding policy, drilling down to the application. Is policy to lead that development, or is policy mostly going to be reactive? Which one is better, and how can we emphasize or help with the better of the two approaches?
Yeah.
And then the second is a request. Would you be willing to talk about your experience with the FTC AI and your personal experience? I think we could benefit from that.
Yeah. So a challenge with emerging technologies is in order to write rules, you need to understand the technology. And Jeremy, you actually did a really good job of saying that when you have a fast-moving, that's a problem if it's a complex technology, but it's especially a problem if it's a complex, fast-changing technology. And so to be able to write rules that properly address certain risks in a technology, you have to understand what the risks are, and you need to understand the technology pretty well. And we're not at that point with even the current level of LLMs about understanding enough to write big rules that apply generally to AI. People are trying, but even when they try, you know, California had this law called SB 1047, and that rule didn't have, it didn't pass, but it didn't have specifics like, company, here's all the ways that you make your AI safe. What they said is, company, you have to make your AI safe And you also have to tell us how you tried to make your AI safe. And if it turns out you didn't make your AI safe, you're going to be in trouble. And so it's not really any different than the reactive approach. It's just saying up front, you got to try harder. Although, and maybe that provides some extra incentives, but maybe it doesn't. My preference in the spaces like this is that we take a sort of a common law tort approach, which does wait until problems happen and then hold people liable when they cause those problems. That doesn't prevent all harm, obviously, but neither, as I was pointing out, given that we don't know how to prevent all harm, neither does writing rules right now. And so I would prefer that we continue to apply these technologies, see what rules already apply to them. Most of the spaces that this tech is being deployed have tons of regulation around them. I mean, healthcare is a heavily regulated sector. There's all sorts of rules about what you can do with electronic medical devices. Doesn't matter whether they use the latest AI or not. You still have to meet those rules. And so take that sector-specific approach, see if there are gaps that come up because there are harms that are being caused. See if we can intervene in a way that mitigates those harms without, getting rid of the benefits of that technology. And then maybe we can write some rules. But I'm more of a wait and see mode right now for the overwhelming area uses of AI technology. I see one over here. Oh, I was going to talk about the FTC. AI was not a hot topic when I was at the Federal Trade Commission the way that it is now. But then again, it was. We just called it something different. And the FTC actually did this over time. When I was there, one of the big reports that we put out was around big data. And that was the sort of hot topic in the 2016 time. And big data, it is AI. It's just not doing the things that AI does now. It is taking lots of information about people and trying to understand like how you might cluster them into different groups so you can serve them better or provide them products or make sure they are who they say they are. And so we did a report that looked at a bunch of the policy implications of that, especially the stuff that the FTC does, which is consumer protection, privacy and anti-fraud work. And so it's another example to me of the fact that a lot of these issues have been discussed for a long time. We're talking about them in the context of AI now, but there really are very similar issues that agencies at the federal and state level and regulators around the world have been discussing for a long time. So we have a track record to build on here. And I think the time at the FTC was a good example of that for me. Happy to talk to you more about the FTC if you're curious about it later. There's obviously it's in the news. Well, it's in my news a lot. I don't know how much it breaks through up here.
Hi, for your regulating the specific, like targeted nailing on all the way down, what do you do when the AI just doesn't understand the question? So as an example, Google's new AI underneath the chat or the search every time you search, this is a benign example, but when you searched how to make your pizza cheese stretchier, it filled in Elmer's glue because it does, when you're taking photographs, it does make the cheese stretch. So people added Elmer's glue to their pizza to make it stretchier. And that can go really far, but who do you hold responsible for that when the AI is just misunderstanding?
So, I mean, I think generally in tort law says like if you're running the computer and you're offering the service, like you're the company that's responsible. So like you can't sue the AI, right? But like Google is the company that's running that. And so they can. Now that gets more complicated with open source models that no company really owns or controls. And so it looks like you have a follow-up. So I do want to try some of that cheesy glue though.
So what do you do when things like Amazon's little chatbot AI, which I don't know if you guys know is Open GPT-4, I believe it is. Yeah. And you can ask a product question and then ask whatever you want after that, and you get the premium version free. What happens if you start asking questions there? Is Amazon liable, or who is liable in that situation?
I mean, again, I think courts are going to look at this case by case, right? There are two parties involved in something like that. If I'm asking Amazon's bot with an eye towards suing Amazon, like tricky questions in order to do that, then I think courts will look at like there's a contributory process that's happening there. But I think ultimately, generally, it's the company that offers the service. That's why they have a strong incentive to make sure this stuff doesn't happen. And generally, when I think about regulation, I think where are the spaces where there is not a strong incentive? And so I think the companies would be liable in that situation. The question is liable exactly for what, and it would depend on the harm, and it depend on like what remedy is possible. But I think that provides a pretty strong incentive right now. And so additional regulation, I just need to be convinced that there was a lack of incentive for them to give the right answers on Amazon that people are going to like, rather than the ones that are harmful and people aren't going to like. So.
All right. Any additional questions? Also, please don't mix glue into your food, just so nobody's suing us.
Unless you were asking whether or not Elmer's is liable, they might be.
Sir, my table mate mentioned the Industrial Revolution, and you talked about all the positive impacts of that, but there was a lot of negative impacts as well. The AI revolution, if we want to call it that, all indications going to be faster and larger impact. You talked about regulating AI, but what else should societies be doing to prepare for the upheaval of losing jobs and the other negative impacts involved in a revolution?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, you know, like when we look back at something like the Industrial Revolution, it looks like big upheaval, but that's because we're sort of compressing like a big period of time into like, you know, the chapter of the history book that you're reading. And it is big, but on the individual level, it sort of looks like your day-to-day is going along incrementally. And so I think that that's going to happen with AI too, that any one day, it's not going to look like that much has changed, but like we're going to look back in 10 years, we're going to be like, wow, this is really different. And so in that kind of situation, it's hard to predict exactly what are big systematic things that we could do. But some of the things that we should spend a lot of time thinking about is like, who are like we need more research on is like, what are the likely jobs that are going to be impacted by this? What are the likely roles? How are they going to be impacted? There's been some good research out of Stanford that looks at call centers and how a AI assistant in a call center helps people do their job when they're answering questions for consumers. And what they found is it actually doesn't help the highest performers very much because they're already really good. It really levels up the people who are brand new to the role or the people who are just haven't been as successful in it. And I think that like if you get back to my thesis that these general large language models are essentially like the average of the internet, that would suggest that it's going to help people who are below the average quite a bit more in some of these information creation jobs than it will help people above the average. I don't think that's true in all cases. And again, I'm using a very broad strokes because if you have an LLM that's very focused on, say, materials resource research, that might help the smartest people who know the right questions to ask and can recognize something that's like a plausible experiment to try, then it would help the people who are much less experienced. So I don't think that's uniform across roles, but I think that is part of the research. We should spend some time trying to figure out like what of these roles are going to change, have a lot of humility about the fact that we're probably going to be really wrong on a lot of that. And I think have the appetite and the interest in exploring the future, not trying to stop it. I think there is not a job I can think of that wouldn't, if you use email in your job, like AI could help you, right? If you write documents of any kind, if you read documents, if you summarize things, if you need to keep track of, you know, large collections of data, like AI will be a tool to help. And hopefully, hopefully where it will be deployed is in the things that are the most boring that we don't like to do. Just like the Industrial Revolution, like got rid of backbreaking labor in the fields. Now, maybe it substituted some backbreaking labor in factories. But even that, over time, as we got the system better, it got rid of that too. And so I think the idea is that we get rid of the boring, less intellectual work, and really in all of jobs, we free up people to do the things that they're more interested in and explore more options. The transition to there is going to take education. It's going to take some investment. It's going to take some strategic thinking. But so there's no easy path. We're going to have to muddle through a little bit. But I think we should get started on thinking about it. And the way you guys should start is that you should try it out. You should see, like, how is this going to affect the thing that I thought I wanted to do with my life? Am I going to be able to use this to magnify what I want to do, or is this going to sort of replace the thing I want to do? And how should that affect what I choose to do in the future?
We have time for maybe one more quick question. Any other questions?
I'm Professor Reed Mohammed, NIST advisor at Capital Technology University in DC. So just like to add on, it's a beautiful discussion. NIST, the Risk Management Framework 1.0 or AI 100 is the one which discusses the map in detail. So if you are going to sue anybody, go through that first. Thank you.
It's a good idea. The NIST risk management framework is a good starting point if you want to understand sort of the big picture possibilities of what AI might bring in the future.
Well, thank you, Atif. That was definitely a very quick question. I was worried because you sometimes ask very long questions. But let's again thank our speaker. Thanks so much for being here today, coming in to visit with us all.